Disclaimer. The views and opinions shared on this commentary are those of the speaker and not of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. Welcome back to another episode of Sorority Sister Talk. Welcome back, Soror Clifton. Welcome back, Soror Page. We have a new line sister joining us tonight. Soror Smith, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, good evening, excuse me. Good evening, ladies. Good evening, everyone. I am Crystal Smith. I currently live in the Northern Kentucky area outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. I currently work in community behavioral health, working with children from adolescence, of course, to younghood who experience behaviors that are severely resulting from issues of trauma. But I'm blessed and grateful to be here today with my line sisters. It's always a pleasure for us to get together. So thank you for the invitation, Francis.
Oh, yes, not a problem, Soror. So tonight's topic is dealing with grief, how we deal with grief, how we assist others in dealing with grief, and how we offer support and receive support as well. So all of the questions are coming straight out of my DM. So please answer the question as they are provoked. You know, if an answer strikes you or you have dealt with it or you have an experience to share, please fill us in. Again, listeners, please know that we are not speaking as experts. We are sorority sisters just talking from our experience. So the first question here says, do you remember the first time you experienced grief?
Yeah.
Soror Paige, you want to share?
I would say my best friend, I think his name was Sean. I want to say Patterson might have been his last name, but he had passed away. He was, we were tight knit in the neighborhood. We were about 8 or 9, childhood friends. And he had went to a church retreat with his family, and he had an older brother and sister. And Warren had went across the street. It was a busy, I don't know, not like a freeway, but like how the two ways be, like convenience store off to the side. But anyways, they were crossing the street to get back to the campground, and Warren went, and Sean wasn't paying attention, and he took off running, and he got hit by a semi. And when it knocked him in the air, he came down head first, all this stuff. We didn't know until word had got back. And I would say that was really the first time experiencing grief as far as a person passing, because he was my friend and I liked him. A little neighborhood crush on,
right,
like that. But that I would say that was my first time actually experiencing grief as far as a person passing.
Wow. So, wow. Yeah. And that was early. So what age? How old were you?
About 8.
Wow. Oh, wow.
And then, I had personal grief because when I was 7, I was molested, as a child. So that's grief within itself. I don't know if that's too much for this platform and people, but, that's, you suffer grief because you don't understand why somebody would have done something like that to you,
exactly,
being a child. But maybe that's a different subject, but you can grieve from that.
Yes, I'm sure you can.
Absolutely. I had a very similar experience in childhood to losing a friend. And, ironically, we were around about that same age, but I was in the I was in the 5th grade. I remember it perfectly. His name was Jamie Gandy. And we were the best of friends, walked home from school together, every day, talked every day. We just had a great friendship. Nothing beyond that, just a wonderful friendship. And I remember getting a call one night, no cell phones at the time. And so our house phone rang and my mom handed me the phone, and it was just awful to hear that he had died. And the long story was his father and his older brother was going to go away for a hunting trip. And the father had taken out the guns the night before. So the day of trip, and Jamie wasn't going. And the day of the trip arrived, and he went upstairs and he found guns, and he was playing with a shotgun. So
Oh,
the brother came up and he was trying to deter him and ask him to put down the gun. And kids at that age, 9, 10, it's kind of fascinating. So he wouldn't put down the gun. So his brother grabbed the gun, and
mm,
they were tumbling over the gun, and it went off, and it
mm,
shot instantly. And I remember the sad part about the incident, outside of him being shot, the death, the obvious was his little sister never understood what was going on. And so, and she went to the bathroom, she got a Band-Aid, and she came and put the Band-Aid over
oh,
the bullet wound.
oh,
And
wow.
it hurt. I mean, that really hurt. That was one of the deepest episodes of pain, because I remember I just couldn't make it go away. You
Right.
know, it hurt because I was never going to see him, never going to talk to him. I'm in this classroom, and I really felt like I was by myself when we got to school. The funeral was horrendous. I just never felt that level of pain at that time. And no matter what happened to me, because I went through certain episodes like you're indicating, Paulina, and grief definitely was present, but it was not a pain.
Mm-hmm.
That pain set in from the loss of that young boy, because no one in my family had really passed away like that at that point.
Mm.
Never had any major issues of grief until then. And it was devastating. It
Oh,
was
wow.
absolutely. And I go every year. Before I moved here, I go every year. My mother and I have a tradition of going to everyone in our family's graves on Memorial Day, and we clean them, we put flowers, and I always go to his. Every year since I was 10 years old, I go to his grave.
Mm.
Mm.
That definitely was deep.
Wow. Wow.
So my first experience with grief was actually my grandmother passing when I was second grade. And so I was actually at camp when she passed, and they pulled me to the side while we were at camp. And, they told me that my grandmother had passed and everything. And I sat, I was sad, but I also knew that she was older. And it was one of those things that I actually happy, I had the choice of whether I wanted to go to the funeral or not. And I actually chose not to go to the funeral. I stayed at camp, went there. And there are certain times you grieve hard, you have that ache. But I also knew that she was sick, and she was tired. And so my grief was for myself, not necessarily for her,
Mm.
because she was no longer in pain. She no longer had to um, do what the doctor told her, and not what she wanted. And she did what she wanted to do. She wanted to live long enough to see my oldest cousin to graduate, and wanted to make sure that my mom had gone through her surgery and everything. And basically, as soon as my mom was fine with her surgery, she passed. So,
Oh,
um,
wow.
right. It was probably about 3 or 4 days after my mom had a major surgery that she passed. And so mommy actually tried to go to the funeral, and she wasn't allowed to because it was in Akron, and we were in Columbus. So that was my first, real experience with grief.
Okay. Okay. So I know this is a sad topic, and it may be heart wrenching, and I know it may be a tearjerker as well. But I think discussing grief during this time is good, especially if we can give some insight of things, of how we have been able to get over grief, deal with grief, and if it is still around, how we cope with it when it does show up, especially with the pandemic and so many people losing their loved ones and friends and coworkers. I think this is an awesome topic to cover. So the next question that comes in says, what are some of the things you have grieved over? Now, I know that we have all grieved over people and pets, but sometimes I have small grief that come in when, say, I lose money or I misplace money, or just trivial grief, but it hurts still the
Ooh,
same.
that's a pain. Don't let me
Yes.
misplace some money, baby. I might need that 20 for some gas. Hey, I came up on the double up today.
Yes.
So
So I know sometimes it can be trivial. But if you are a gambler and you gambled away your mortgage money or something similar to that, that can be a heartache, as a grief as well. But what are some of the other things that you ladies have grieved over? I know for myself, I've also grieved over relationships, platonic relationships, as well as romantic ones.
Mhm.
Well, also grieving over something that our children go through, kind of vicarious grief. You know, my experience some losses, great losses of friends, and these are children I watched grow. Some of these children I remember when they were born, and
Mhm.
it hurts. It may be an indirect grief to me, but the significance of that pain is just the same.
Right, right, right.
Um, you know, I grieve a lot the situations in my life and how things have turned out. Um, and my role in them, or my role, not part of it. And so there are a whole lot of things that in my life that I wish I had done differently, or things that had turned out differently. And so you get into all these situations. And a lot of times people think, well, it's very trivial. But when you're talking about yourself and how things are going on in your life, it's not, it's not trivial to you,
Right.
that $20, that $20 is the last $20 that you had. Um, it's, it's the difference between making sure that you can get to work on time, making the $20, or, having food for the night, so those are little griefs, little things that you grieve. I grieve a lot that situations have not turned out the way that I expected them to, or things or ways that I wanted them to go away.
May I ask a question
Mhm.
Yes.
of you, Sora Clifton? Because you have these experiences with the grief, and with grief, historically there's a feeling of loss.
A feeling of
So
what?
loss,
Okay.
loss. So and what my question to you is, in the current day, how have you planned forward for some of those experiences, some of those episodes not to recur in your life? And if they were to present themselves, how would you address it in accordance not to grieve moving forward?
Ooh, that's difficult. Um, got to take my glasses off for that one. Sometimes, sometimes it's about not necessarily preparing myself, but stopping and looking back to see what it is that I could, if I have done everything that I possibly could have done for it. Is there anything else that should have been done? Was there any other way for this situation to go? Sometimes it's, yes, there is something that I could do, and how can I move forward from that? Sometimes it's no. And there's the grief of the loss of that opportunity. Um, for me, I suffer from major depression. And so some of the items that I get is, um, do I stop living because of that? Do I stop? And I'm not talking about death or anything like that.
I'm
it's
about to say,
stepping.
don't let me
No,
drive
no,
to your house. I'm about to say, don't
No.
let me drive to your
no, no,
mother.
no.
End up in there like, what's up?
No, I'm not talking about death. I'm talking about the fact of
Emotion.
physically getting up, moving forward in my life
Mm.
on that.
Oh,
And
we
the
so
most
balance.
because
it's
there's a
it's
there's
more
a lot of
emotion.
time. Yes. And so because there's a lot of
Mhm.
times where you get to that grieving point and you don't want to do anything.
Mm.
And you stop and you're stuck in this one little space. And so for me, preparing myself, and there's a lot of times you can't prepare yourself because you're not expecting that to happen. And so I have to continue on. I have to stop. I have to evaluate what I did, what my part in that situation is. And then I actually have to do the grieving and then continue on. Because a lot of times you get stuck in your mind. You don't even grieve because you're still trying to contemplate what has happened and how that's affecting you right then and there. And you don't grieve. I don't grieve it. I just get stuck in my head at that point in time. I had to start learning how to grieve and continue on. Because once you grieve, you can move past that. But if you're not grieving, you get stuck in that one point in time. And that's probably the biggest thing for me, is that I had to learn to grieve it and continue on.
Wow. Wow. You know what, Sorora Clifton, thank you so much for the transparency. And Sorora Smith, thank you so much for the amazing question. Yes. So the next question says, how sensitive are you to other people's grief? You know, are you in a rush for them to hurry up and grieve, or, you know, say things like they still talking about that, like they not over that yet? I know when I was younger, I have said those things until I have actually had the experience of it. So how do you ladies feel? How sensitive are you to other people's grief? Sora Page?
I'm sensitive because it's like this. If I love you as my best friend, it's not about when you gonna get over it. It's about, okay, because you're gonna have those days where you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to express your own, and you can't stop it. So I look at it like, if you're my best friend and I love you as family, grieve that shit as long as you want. All I say is make sure you get up, make sure you be positive, make sure you are doing what you need to do for yourself. You know what I'm saying? And the thing about getting over any like grief, pain, anything, you're supposed to sit in it, sit in that hurt, sit in it and recognize what it is. And then as you sit in it and you start to think and you're venting, you can finally move forward. You can move forward eventually, because you're going to get tired yourself of grieving and different things. Like a gentleman I was talking to, he grieved his wife for 3 years, well, 2 years, because she died of cancer. They was together for 4, and out of the 4 years, 3 years she was sick, she passed. And he was telling me this, and I said, are you still grieving? Because when people bring up stuff like that, it's like, okay, you're grieving or you're just sharing an experience. And he was like, no, I'm not grieving. He said, for 2 years I grieved. He said the 3rd year I was like, what am I doing? Like, he want me to move on. So I was like, oh, okay. So I look at it like, if you my best friend and you somebody I talk to, I'm not going to expect you to get over whatever it is. I'm not going to expect you to get over it immediately. And even if it's a year or 2 from now, I'm still not going to expect it. If you want to call me and vent about it, okay, cool. I might be half asleep, but I'm gonna listen to you, because that's your way. That's part of the grieving process for you. You know what I'm saying? That's for you. And I'm going to be there to listen to you. So no. Now, if you somebody I don't know, I don't mess with, I'm like, why are you talking to me? Point blank. But, we not even gonna get that far with people. So, I mean,
Lord have mercy.
I'm just saying, we're not gonna get there. I'm probably not gonna know nothing about it. I'm like, oh damn, do that well. And a few Hail Marys to you, and I hope you're okay. Point blank, period. But if you know somebody I love and cherish in my life, you know what I'm saying? You never get over that. Just like one of our sorors now. I think she grew every day missing her mother. You know what I'm saying? And I see it. I see it in her posts. I see it in different things, especially when you get around family time. Well, actually, two are sores. You know what I'm saying? So it's how can you be insensitive or sensitive to that? It's just what it is. If I love you, I'm gonna be here to listen to what you have to say. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, that's my personal.
That's the thing. It's definitely the. And speaking of the mother grief, you know, I lost my father, and that was one of the most profound losses that you will ever encounter. But it seems like as time went on, because my father has been dead now since 2001, so it's been a very long time. But it doesn't make my ache or my the hole that creates inside of my soul doesn't make that any better. But you know, I'm no longer grieving, as you said. But I've watched people lose their mothers, and it doesn't seem that grief there is something different. It just seems like, because I don't have that experience yet, by the grace of God, but it just seems like the mother, and we know because of the mother's role to the child, you know, especially if they have a close relationship and so forth. That's just a profound loss that it changes, you know, it changes that person. It has that profound ability to do so. And it's just, it's amazing, you know, not that it's a difference, you know, as far as my emotions, you know, I lost a parent, but I just see that the magnitude of the loss is something totally different.
So I've actually had that loss.
Yeah.
So I lost my mom going on 3 years now. I think there's a difference in grief, and taking on that grief for other people, depending on the situation. My mother had been sick a very long time.
Yeah.
And so
Correct.
there is a difference in my grieving and my sister's grieving versus that of my father's grieving over my mother. And so while my sister and I hurt with the loss of her, we're not grieving. My father's grieving. My mom and dad had a commuter marriage for over 20 years. So he wasn't, you know, he wasn't in the house every day to see her suffering. My sister and I were, and everything. And so while hurt from the loss, our grieving is basically, we're done with that, because she's not in pain anymore. She's not suffering. She had an LVAD, so she's not running on batteries, or, you know, that, you know, it's different when you have to see somebody who, you know, they beep and you have to run to make sure that batteries are changed, or they're plugged up and stuff like that, as a life-saving instrument for them. And so she no longer has that. My grief started over again on Friday when we had to put our dog down. Well, our dog was, Paulina brought that dog in my house for my mama. No.
It was me and your sister. It was a joint effort.
I brought the dog in my house.
We didn't know
we
the
told
dog.
y'all not to bring it.
We didn't know Emo was gonna get that big.
And so after I told them not to bring the dog in the house, they brought the dog in the house. And my mom took it one look, I don't want this dog, and then picked him up and was like, well, you here now, so I don't know what we're gonna do with you. And he stayed in her room. That was her dog. So, you know, I have a bit of grief again because of the loss of her dog on Friday. But again, it's the same thing. He was in pain. I no longer have to see his suffering. And so we'll grieve for a while and continue on with our lives. My father is still grieving.
He's gonna grieve.
And there's only there's only so much that we can do, because at some point in time, he's going to have to start living. And he's starting to do that now. It took him 2 years to get a haircut. You know?
Baby, because your daddy was looking like Frederick Douglass, right?
Yes, and you know, and he was proud of the fact that he
no shade, no shade, no tea, no slight. That's what
right. Somebody told him he looked like Frederick Douglass, and he took that and ran with it. He didn't have a haircut for 2 years. And he's looking for, he's in the process of looking for a new position. He just retired. He might be going down to a church. He's a priest. He might be going down to a church in the Virgin Islands.
Yeah,
and
let's
so
go.
because he's starting to turn over a new chapter in his life, it was easier for us to get him to do a couple things that he had stopped doing when my mother passed. That first one was that haircut. That was rough. It was really rough because we've been trying to get him to have a haircut. Because we've been trying to get him to have a haircut for over a year, and he refused. He just adamantly refused. And so a new chapter. We finally got the haircut, and people are now they're complimenting him on the haircut. So we actually might be able to get him to keep the haircut this time. But he looks better still in his grief. But he's slowly starting to come to the point where whether she's here or not, he still has to live. So
Right.
there's only so much in it. If you are loving that person, you can help walk them through that grief. Try not to take it on as your own, but
Sure.
there are times that you have to have that tough conversation, or you got to get up and you got to do something. You got to continue to live. This person's not going to want you to live this way.
Right.
Absolutely. And the crazy part, life partner, as you're exhibiting, is very different, because my mother and her sister, their husbands passed away and they never remarried. My mother's 88. Father's been dead, gone for 20 years. They, there was no other men. They did not remarry,
Wow.
So that grief is real, and it will live forever, someplace there in their soul.
And I think it's different for a lot of people. I was part of a book club where we had this lady, and her husband had passed. I'm not certain if her husband passed or she got divorced. Anyway, she was single. She had been married at one point in time. And she met this gentleman, and his wife had passed away 6 to 9 months earlier. And within 3 months, they were engaged.
Wow.
Right. Now, mind you, they were in their 60s and 70s when they got engaged and everything like that. But if I remember correctly, one of his things was that he didn't know how to live by himself. He had been trained. His wife had trained him to be a husband. And so he didn't know how to do that. And so, and he felt it was okay, and that he felt that his wife would be okay with him remarrying, and they did remarry. Within the year, they remarried. So, but sometimes, for women, I think it takes longer.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the next question. Oh, go ahead, Crystal.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, if ever, because my parents were married over 40 years, so I get it.
Yeah,
definitely.
Right. So the next question that came in says, in what ways do you offer comfort, and in what ways, if you are the person that's going through grief, how do you receive it?
Well, I try to be around them, try to go visit if they're close, try to go visit, call them, go to the movies, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I would just try to be there for them.
Well, for me,
well,
it's the same. It's the same, because the first thing I offer anybody is the listening ear. The opportunity to be the vessel to vent, anything that they need. Like Selena said, spend as much time as you can with them, giving them the attention, just letting them know they are not alone. And that is really the gist. People will come to you as they will. It may not be the day of the trauma. It may not be the month or the year of the trauma. They come when they're ready. They come on their own, but you let them know they are not alone and you are there for them. If I'm receiving the grief, I'm kind of really the opposite. I just really become isolated so I can take that deep breath within myself. If people want to console me, they want to comfort me, I don't shut people out. I will, I'll talk and things like that. But at the end of the day, I most likely won't ask for anything, until I'm ready. But I won't shut people out if I'm going through something. It's just really just hard for me to kind of, of course, be myself, but I'll allow them to be there because, if somebody really loves you and they care for you, that's all they want to do is be there for you.
And to speak to that, because I know when Miss Clifton passed, when I had talked to Dion that day and she told me what she said, I'm sorry. I know I didn't rush to Dion's side or anything. And it still bothers me that Miss Clifton passed away because I saw her as the second mom. And Dion, no, it took me a while. I wasn't even at church. When I spoke to Dion about it, we were at church when I spoke to her about it because I finally came back to church. And, you see, it affected me. Like she kind of, she fine talking about it, but it affected me because I saw Miss Clifton as my second mom. Like, it's a thing where Dion know I listen to her if she want to talk about anything, but I couldn't run to her side when her mother passed. And I'm sorry, Dion, I love you, but I just I can't do it because when she told me, I was like, what do you mean? I said, she gonna be okay. She said, no, Polina, no, she's not. I said, girl, stop playing. I just like, no, I don't believe it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. It's hard. Like, I don't know. Me and Miss Clifton had a bond. We used to sit there and watch, the ID channel. And it's funny because I find myself now watching the Ion channel. Boy, you say about some Chicago PD. Hank ain't no hope. I'm messing with Hank. Hank be doing some cricket stuff. I'm sorry. I don't know. I would be there for anybody grieving. And I would expect people I love as my family to be there for me or to reach out. Like Sora Crystal said, I'm not going to stop receiving. If you want to call, see how I'm doing, I need that. Because I can imagine if my parents pass away, hey, y'all better come get the baby. I'm going on an island somewhere.
Right. I won't be back for 6 months.
Yeah, just leave me alone. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. But yeah.
So this next question, I think, maybe Sora Page and Sora Smith, you guys can shed some light on this because it says, how is grief and trauma related? And I know that you shared your experience and you said that you grieved over it, Sora Page. So how would you connect your grief and your trauma? And Sora Smith, I know you say you work with children that may have had trauma and grief. How does that play out together?
For me, I guess you could say it could cause like triggers later on in life that you might not know they're your triggers until you start working on yourself and start understanding self and why when certain things happen, why you might react, not realizing it could stem from what happened to you in your childhood, especially with me. I think it can bring about promiscuous natures, like different things maybe that you might not even been groomed to even think about or know, but it can happen, how you say, involuntarily, where you just don't realize it, until you're in the moment, I guess. And it's something that just stick with you, you don't forget is there. So grieving over it, nah, not long, it goes away, but I do think it does cause definite trauma on down the road as you get older, because you don't understand why maybe you can't relate to certain things that other people can. So my experience. So
see, dealing with these children that I deal with, grief has become part of the fabric of who they are.
Mm.
They're longing and they're living loss of something, whether it's parent, whether it's a sexual, experience that they shouldn't have been a part of, whether it's being in foster, which has a big and a major impact of grief, because you're longing for the family that you don't have. There's so many different elements when you're dealing with children and trauma. What they long for or what they lost is what they will continue to desire to have. The behavior, the episodes, the things that they demonstrate, their basic cry for help, because they're suffering, their ongoing suffering. And when you work with them, a lot of what I learned last year, because I worked for CPS and in that division for a time, and the secondary traumas and the grief that can encompass people that work with these populations is now becoming very, very, intense when it comes to the therapeutic setting. First of all, especially me as a mother, I have watched so many mothers grieve because their kids were taken. I've watched so many kids grieve and long to be with this parent, and they ripped away and going back to another foster care situation. I'm sitting here watching these children as parents and visits, they're having this time, but this time is temporary. And, when you go to bed at night, after you have, even with child fatality, when you have to go to bed at night and lay down, you somebody else's mother, constantly putting yourself in a situation mentally like, oh my gosh, and that can have a profound effect on you. So when it comes to grief, you can develop grief due to situations, in a professional setting that are way beyond your control,
Wow.
and
Wow.
it's kind of like I learned to be, I won't call it stone cold, but it's very numbing, because I've dealt with kids in pain for over 20 years. I can't bring that home. I used to bring that home to my child, the hurt and the pain, and I can't do that. I learned as I went through life, this is a result of this stressful job that you have. And dealing with population, families and children going through such hurtful things. And you come home, you don't feel right. And then the way you respond to your own child necessarily appropriate, yell, or maybe just upset, snappy, just things like that, because you were irritated.
And
So
that goes with managing your emotions too. That goes with trying to manage your emotions with what
I do that.
Mm-hmm.
I was 20 something at that time. I didn't know how to balance out that.
Yeah.
Now it's different. I have to help this child. I know that I have to help this family. But my thing is, I can't take on their grief. I cannot.
Right.
So I know for me, and thank you so much for your transparency, and thank you for sharing. I'm sure that'll help our listeners who may have stressful jobs or who have experienced trauma in their life. I know for me as a parent, I have experienced trauma concerning my children, and I know you brought that up earlier, where my child was the perpetrator and not the victim. And it caused me to grieve so heavily that I almost lost my marriage because I was so focused on how do I move forward. I didn't raise my child to do this or to behave in this way. How could this happen to me? Where did I go wrong? What did I do? And it came with a lot of guilt. And as Soror Clifton shared, I was stuck in a cycle. I was not able to fulfill my wifely duties. I wasn't able to care for my other children in the manner in which they needed. And then I looked for ways out and people to blame, not realizing that, with time, things will heal. Counseling played a big part in the healing process for me. And my grief come in waves because I still grieve. if it's a certain time of the year, if it's a certain smell, if the person have a resemblance, or I hear the name or a certain song and things where we connected and enjoyed, or a private joke. Those things sometimes cause me to grieve and grieve heavily. Um, so I know, for mothers who children have participated in things or have had behaviors that cause them to be removed from the home, or even incarcerated, or as you said, Sora Smith, death, is very hard. There is no name for a mother who loses her child.
Mm.
There is names for everyone else, but there is no name for a mother who loses her child.
Mhm.
And I believe in my heart that's just because that's against all order of life, and so that is a pain and a grief that is hard to cope with.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Do you think it's wrong? Because like me and my dad talk, right? And I told my dad, I said, I don't worry about y'all's birthday. I don't worry about how old y'all are. I just be happy that y'all are here another day, another year. Okay. And I said, I don't know, the way me and my dad talk is like, if my dad or my mom passed away, I mean, I know I'm gonna be hurt and I'm gonna grieve, but I think I would deal with it better because I know it's gonna come,
Mm.
because it's just it's in life. It's expected for your parents to go before you. It's expected for you to go before your children. That's how life's supposed to go until God calls home who you want to call home for whatever particular reason, or some random act of violence. But if you look at it head on, as you're going to lose this person, do you think that would ease your grief, because you're going to spend as much time and be happy within their present way more, and that they're gonna pass away? I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but me and my dad, we talk about this stuff, and I said, I think, because my dad said, we all know we're going to go. And I said, you're right, Dad, and I love you for it. And it's crazy. So we talk about grieving, right? Let me tell you, I'll share a moment with you. So when I was talking to my dad about this, right, I got off the phone with my dad and I looked at my son, because he was doing virtual learning, and I started to grieve as if they were lost, like a mother losing her child, because anything could happen. And my dad, like, I really, like, Jace got up and he left, and I started, like, I really cried. Like, I was grieving, like, if they were gone. And I think, like, am I crazy? But then I'm thinking, like, I felt better afterwards. Like, so if my dad was to pass away, it's like, I would be okay with that. If my mom passed away, I'd be okay with that. Like I told them, I said, I know it's going to come a day that I'm not going to talk to y'all. I know it's going to come a day when I need some advice and I can't call and be like, Dad, what would you think? Or Mom, what would you think? I said, but I'm okay with that. Like, I've already faced the fact and faced grief. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe I'm not putting it in the correct
No, I mean,
terminology or something, but I'm just wondering, like, if people face it, can
right.
it help? Can it ease the grief? Can it ease it when it actually happened? Because I mean, it's just like, now it's reality. It's reality. It's here. But would it help you move on from it? Does that make sense? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it does. And I'll do that because, like I said, my mother was dealing with a long illness. She was diagnosed with diabetes when she was 35. At that point in time, it was still considered juvenile diabetes. So, for a very long time, I knew that my mother was not a healthy person. It didn't register to us that she was really unhealthy until her heart rate, fraction, I believe it's called fraction rate, got down to like 17. And my aunt, who was a nurse, went to work and told one of her coworkers that her sister's fraction rate was like 17, and they were asking her, well, what hospital is she?
Right.
And my aunt is like, what are you talking about? And they're like, she should be in the hospital. So my mother never really displayed symptoms of a sick person until they said that she would need to have this LVAD to help her to live.
Hmm.
So we had this external thing to show us how internally she was not a very well person. So the moment that they put this external thing on her, those thoughts and that grief started for us.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
when you have something like that and you start looking at the survival rate, and the survival rate tells you up front, you have 2 to 3 years on this particular device to live. And then you see, and I think that was one of the differences between me and my dad. My dad saw that somebody had been on one for like 8 to 10 years. And so he's looking for that 8 to 10 years. My sister and I see the 2 to 3 years.
The reality.
That's the reality, especially for the kind that she had, because she had the long term, she had the permanent. If you're going for a transplant, there's a possibility, then they put a different one in. And then we had already been through this with my sister's sister-in-law. She had an LVAD also. So we've already know that within 2 to 3 years, my mother has an expiration date.
Yes.
And so we had those conversations. We had that grief. So, you look over and be like, damn, she's not going to be here much longer. It helped us because we knew she was no longer in pain. It helped us because we knew that we had done everything that we possibly could as her children to make sure that she had a good life. We did things that we wouldn't normally do. We stayed at the house. We finally took a family vacation. We drove from Columbus all the way to the Mall of America in Minnesota and drove back.
I understand that. I'm like, Lord.
Yeah, 18 hours in the car with her. So, we did these things not only for her, but for us to make sure we had those memories and stuff like that. So when she passed, and she had a stroke. She didn't die because of the heart per se. She had a stroke. And so when she passed, yes, we grieved, but it was also a sigh of relief. It was a sigh of relief because she was no longer in pain. It was a sigh of relief because our lives could actually move forward. And so our grief was different than those of ones that, even though it was unexpected for her to pass at that point in time, we already knew that it was coming, that she did have an expiration date, and we dealt with it. So the grieving does not lessen. It's just in a different way.
Got you.
Because you're already there. And it's even different than when your parent is, or your significant other dies unexpectedly. My sister's husband died unexpectedly. And so her grief at that point in time is different than the one than my mother's. She came home and he was dead.
Absolutely.
And so even with conversations that they had, she wasn't expecting her husband of almost 10 years to die. So that grieving is different than the one that we actually prepare ourselves for. The grief is still there. It still hurts. It still hurts. Does not, for some people, it does not last as long. And that's the point where you have to know that you've got to grieve and go on instead of getting stuck in that point. Because when you're stuck in that point, you're not grieving. Because grief is when you're letting it out, you're letting the hurt out, you're letting the pain out. you're purging when you have grief. If you're not doing all of that, if you're stuck in that moment on what could I have done? Why did this happen to me? How could this be? How am I going to live? How am I going to survive? That's not grieving. Grieving is understanding that this person is gone, and remembering the good times, the bad times, the the silly times, you know, all that stuff, the times that you were mad, and letting the hurt out, and understanding that even though they're gone, your life still has to go on. Once you get to the point where you grieve and you can move on, then, you know, things get better.
Got you. I got
Wow, wow, that is a different way to look at things, I think, and I think you're correct about that because once you guys know that I work in a long-term care field, and I have been working in a long-term care field for a number of years. But I believe family members, once they place their loved one in a long-term care setting, they immediately begin to grieve as if the person is already gone. Or if the person has a diagnosis, say they are aging in place at home, and the person has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, they begin to grieve the loss of that person because they cannot interact with them on the same way, in the same level. But the next question says, how do you identify grief through physical signs in your body, whether it's you or a friend or a family member who's going through grief? And what behaviors do a grieving person display?
probably lashing out.
Well,
Not,
you
It
know,
depends.
yeah.
there's a continuum for everything, from very little to extreme. You know, I know with myself, I feel anxiety. That I know that's immediate feelings that I feel when there's a grief or a loss. I mean, I'm very anxious, overwhelmed. You know, don't know what to do in the moment or where we put it. You know, especially when that moment happens. And what I mean by that is, you know, because I have a growing family. My mother is 88, and I have a brother that's, you know, hold on, how I'm 47, so he's 68. You know, so I have a growing family. So, you know, these things have started to, you know, transpire, you know, and it's different depending on the circumstance. Like Dion said, when my father was sick for 13 years with heart issues, diabetes, he was sick for 13 years. And when he died, he was just starting to drive again, go to church again. It was like the calm before the storm. And days later, he died. Watched the Lakers game. You know, I wasn't ready for him to go, and especially in the way that he went. My oldest daughter, was in a car and watched him die. That has guided trauma in her life for most of her life.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was like, you know, there wasn't it was an acceptance. He was sick. Like, you know, I said, I mean, I knew he was sick. We've been through 4 catheterizations. We've been through these ups and downs, and, you know, we've been through all this. We've been on the brink of him not supposed to be here, you know, and I've breathed, you know, different ways, every single surgery, every single time. My brother, my brother died in 2018. At the time, he was 55, double amputee, terrible diabetes, and died in a long-term care facility. Well, through the hospitals and the surgeries, I was his power of attorney. So again, my and began went through the roller coaster so ways. When he died, he actually signed himself, was still in sound mind. He was in a nursing home, and he signed himself over to hospice. He said he was tired and he didn't want to fight any longer.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, once hospice, you know, we bring them into play, it's a matter of time here, you know, because he stopped all treatment. And so, in that part, I was relieved. I was just so, something came out of me, just like because I watched and watched and watched, you know. So again, you know, I feel things in different ways. I feel grief, you know, in different ways. It is anxiety, I know, is my constant, you know, because I'm going to feel that at some point along that ride. But, you know, overwhelmed, you know, at times stressed, you know, you're tired, you know, because you've been that caregiver. You know, when I worked, in the outreach service, we developed a conference for the caregivers called Who's Caring for the Caregiver? Because a lot of you get into those situations, and that caregiver is experiencing burnout, loss, grief, and all of those things at the same time. Who's caring for them? So I just experience it so many different ways, but it really depends on that circumstance.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, with the caregiver, because I was a caregiver for a long time, caregivers tend to put on a happy face.
Mm.
And you
A facade.
don't, yes, and you don't know. And it was only after, it wasn't until after my mother had passed that I realized that I had stopped living basically for myself. So people ask, like right now, people ask me, what do I like to do? And I can't really tell you. And, I'm just starting to get into that point on that. And so with, how you show grief, a lot of times outside of, crying every once in a while, there's a lot that you're not going to see that I'm grieving for anything, because I look like I'm going on with my daily, my daily life and everything. You're just not going to see it. And then there's a lot of times that you wish somebody would just stop and say, are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then if you say yes, to go back and say, no, for real, are you really okay? Because yes is going to be your default. It's, it's your default, because you don't want to be a burden on anybody else while you're trying to take this burden off of somebody. And a lot of times people don't do that. And so to go back and just recheck up on a person during their grief, and even say, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to just stop and breathe for a moment. And a lot of times you don't get that. And so that's why, Crystal, when you say, who's cares for the caregiver and everything like that, those are much needed, because caregivers don't have enough resources out there to go to.
Absolutely. The one thing I want to kind of touch on just briefly what Paulina said earlier, and one experience of my own that's profound to me when it comes to grief and loss. With Paulina, what you said about, when it happens with your parents, is that strange? No, it's not strange. But the one gift of God gave you your parents at this point in life, because you're older now. You can receive what grief and loss and death is. We're not in the 20s anymore talking about, I don't want to talk about it. No, this time we have life insurance policies. It's real, so we're at a better point in our lives to where we can receive if something happens to that degree, even if it's like your sister experienced,
Yep.
It's different, but again, a much better position being at the stage of life is in, versus if she was any point younger. And then the one thing I admire about older people, my mother, like I said, she'll be 88. And when someone in our family, they don't go to long-term care facilities. The only reason my brother went there was because of the occupational therapy, the things that he needed, we couldn't give him. And my grandmother went briefly, and she brought her home. That was not going to happen. So everyone that's gotten sick, my grandmother, my father, my mother's sister, both of them, they died while in her care, one way or another, and most of them in our house. She's been through that. I never see my mother, hardly ever see my mother cry.
I'm about to get my stuff.
I've barely ever seen her grieve. She was always strong. But one thing about a person of that stage of life, they give it a lot to God. They rely on their spirituality to carry them forward, regardless of how they feel, regardless of how they've been impacted. And that's the whole thing. They give it to God and they move forward. And again, I've never seen her, even with my brother, that was her child. There's moments where she cries, but she does that in solitude.
Mhm.
There may be a little bit of tears at the surface, but as far as grief, like she's so strong. And it's like, where's the grief? I mean, I know how I'm feeling. I know how I want to act sometimes, but you don't see that. She handles it with such grace and dignity. But her spirituality is the forefront of her life.
Mm.
And that's a detriment to Black women. And this is a totally different conversation. But because we have dealt with so much trauma and grief in our life, we have that strong Black woman mentality, and nobody wants to bring up the fact that we're vulnerable, you know?
Well, and I think that brings about that masculine energy as
Yeah.
well sometimes. So,
But yeah, that's a
Well,
whole
that
nother
plays
topic.
yeah, you're right about that.
Yes, we will be
Yeah.
talking about that soon. We will be talking about that in our next segment. That's our next topic. However, I do know, Sora Smith, that you do have to leave soon. We do have a couple more questions, so we are going to jump into that. But Sora Smith, whenever you have to check out, just go ahead and do so. We thank you for joining us tonight. We are so happy that you were able to share so much knowledge and wisdom with us. Through your professional experience and through your personal experience. So let's jump into the next question. The next question says, what are some things that should be avoided while grieving? What are some things that should be avoided while grieving? So I know for me, my biggest grief was, and still is my child's behavior, an incident that took place. And so one of the things when I was heavy in my grief that I avoid doing was making major choices, making major decisions that were going to affect me, because I was just so vulnerable. I just was, willing to agree with pretty much anything to just have a sense of stability and peace. So what are some of the things that you ladies think should be avoided while going through grief?
Well,
Alcohol.
you just said
Substance,
avoidance.
drugs,
Avoidance,
I'm about to say
and
substance abuse.
you
Yeah.
said it. Avoidance is one, and denial is another.
Yeah.
And I think those are two of the bigger issues in grief that will keep a person stagnant if they continue to behave or make decisions in that way.
Yeah. I agree. Um, and avoid avoidance, avoid avoidance.
That's
Um,
it.
you sometimes you've got to look at the situation head on.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people don't want to look at the situation. And I'll deal with it later. If there's no dealing with it later, you've got to deal with it now. Dealing with it now not only puts everything into perspective, but it allows you to move on from your outer experience of grief. Like I said, you're always going to have grief in some form or fashion, but that physical grieving can stop earlier, and it's not going to be a detriment to your life if you look at the situation head on. When my grandmother passed away, she was 92, and she did something in the nursing home. I kid you not. Now, we weren't in the nursing home. Yeah, we were in the nursing home. She said something like feed me, and had me to actually feed her. I never fed her any food, but she was like feed me, and she acted like a baby for a minute, and I was like, oh, that's it. And within 10 days she was gone on that. But we had, I had to look at it, look it right into the in its face. I could not avoid the fact that, she did something that was so not her personality, that, when people go back and say, I don't see the signs. No, there are signs there. There are signs there. And that was a huge one for her. And when she went to the hospital, it was like, Dad, you got to come home. I'll be there. No, 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 you gotta come home. You gotta come home now. So avoidance, you cannot avoid, you can't, and you cannot rely on substances that's going to allow you to
numb
dig
you from
easier
Mhm.
into all that. Yeah.
Well, they only matter fame. That's it. When that all wears off, we'll still have to face the grief, the trauma,
Yes.
the loss. You can't run from
Amen.
it at all.
And then, and once you move past it, you're like, I'm okay. I'm human. You know, it's part of the human
But if you
process.
move past,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
people don't survive. You know, some people
Yeah.
take life because they can't handle that.
Mm.
People all the way out there on the substance use, continuum, and that will eventually end to, a loss of life, a loss of cognition, all of these things. A lot of people don't win that battle. They can't come back from that loss. They can't come back from that grief. It's just too significant, too painful.
Mm. So the next question says here, what are your thoughts on grief being a gateway to depression? So, Sora Smith, you touched the nail on the head. Share more, elaborate.
Well, let me unmute myself. Uh, just honestly, depression. Okay, let me use myself. Let me use myself real quick. I was adopted at 3 weeks old. So going throughout my life, I grieved. I grieved for why. I didn't grieve for mother. I didn't grieve for a father. I grieved for why was I given away? Period. Why? And I grieve for answers, constant answers that nobody around me could give me. And they poured love, and I was spoiled, and they poured, and no one ever told me no. And also, I always thought, my parents overcompensated, because of the adoption. But again, none of that ever filled the hole that I had for wanting to know these answers. So that was grief that guided my life from the beginning of my life to even now. Although another topic is I recently met my biological mother in the last couple of years. And I got the answers. But still, for 45 years, that guided my life. So at 18 years old, I had a boyfriend. We had a breakup. Again, never having a father, never knowing the father. I always grieved for that. My daddy was amazing, man. Don't get me wrong. But it was still something internally that I just couldn't, click with when it came to the male counterpart. So we broke up. I handled it in horrible ways. I didn't know how to get past the grief, didn't know how to get past the loss, binge eating, purging, diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, hospitalized for 2 weeks, the whole gamut of grief, and diagnosed as a manic depressive. So then therefore, do I think the grief could be the gateway to depression? I think there's a high probability. Now, not everyone who grieves will be depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is able to be diagnosed on the spectrum in the DSM. But everybody that experiences grief may have some symptoms of depression.
Already.
May not almost always be diagnosable. Yes, depressive symptoms can emerge in anybody experiencing that. Of course, people feel hopeless, worthless. They don't want to sleep. Their eating is interrupted. Their sleeping, all these things, But I think it has a high probability to do so. But I don't think it has to lead to a diagnosable depression in all cases.
Okay. Sora Clifton, Sora Page, did you guys have anything to share? I think that was a beautiful explanation and answer to that question.
I wouldn't gateway, who knows? Because as we see, Sora Smith has already had symptoms of depression anyways, of past trauma triggered things, being adopted. So she already had, like she said, I think you already be depressed, but putting grieving on top of it just makes it even worse. It's like, how you going to get through it, because you're already having those symptoms of depression and feeling worthless and don't want to eat, restless nights, and just in your head, as Sora Clifton has said, not being able to move past, and then somebody passing on top of that. That's like it's almost like you're a ticking time bomb. Either you're going to diffuse yourself and be able to be good, or either you're going to blow up, and then that's when we can turn to substance abuse to numb yourself, to not think, not have to think. And then that goes into, oh, well, if you wasn't an addict, you possibly become an addict now. You know what I'm saying? And then on top of that, like I see some of the homeless people out here, they made me look at them like, you was probably a normal functioning person at one point in time, but you probably was depressed. Probably something happened. Even though some of them choose to be out there like that. One lady said she want to be out there. I said, girl, more power to you, but I'm just saying, you want to go in McDonald's and use it for the whole baths, all good for you, but I'm just saying. But anyways, I think a person can already have some underlying depression. I don't think necessarily it can be a gateway if that person has healed themselves from depression that they possibly had. Could it be a gateway? Yes. But is it a gateway? It's hard to say. I would say no, because some people could already be depressed about stuff, and it's just, piling it on. Hell, work can make you depressed. You know what I'm saying? Just having to go in there and look at the man like, I have to look at you today. You know what I'm saying? That can make you depressed. Talking to customers can make you depressed. I mean, heck, just last night, me personally, I sat in my TV room and was crying. Can I tell you why I was crying? No, I just felt some type of way about life. And sometimes it can just come on and you can feel it. You can feel it in your body. So, I think you can already be depressed.
What you went through was somewhat of a defense mechanism so you could get relief, because we also cry to relieve ourselves.
True.
From the frustration, the tension, those things. Did you have maybe a depressive episode or something that was depressing that maybe, happened in a moment? Possibly. Was it enough for a diagnosable depression? No. It was a moment, or it was episodic. It was an episodic experience, but we try to relieve ourselves, to just release some of that pain or that overwhelmingness at that time.
Pressure. Yeah, for sure.
Sora Clifton, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Not really. I think Sora Page and with Sora Smith and you Sora Post, and you guys have pretty put it on there out there. There are times and circumstances that trauma is going to cause depression. There's a lot of times and circumstances that a depressed person will have trauma to escalate what their depression is. And so, and there's a lot of times where I don't necessarily know if people know if they've had a traumatic experience.
Right.
You just you just don't know. So you can't say that that this person is not depressed because they've had a traumatic experience, or they haven't. It is chemicals in your body. It's a mess.
Very good. I love you all. Thank you. I love you all.
Yes, thank you so much, Sora, for joining us. We have one last question, and then, ladies, we'll wrap it up for tonight. Sora Smith, did you have any parting wisdom or words that you wanted to share before you go?
Most definitely. When it comes to grief or loss, again, don't isolate yourself. Definitely allow the people that love you or who are close to you to be there for you and help you. And if you feel that you need help, always find a way to get some form of help, some form of support. You are not alone in this world, because everyone goes through something. Yes. Many blessings.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, ladies. So we are on our last question, and our last question here says, Who should participate in grief support groups, and do they really help?
I think they help. I've never been okay, so I've never been in a grief support group,
Mhm.
but I could see it helping if the person's willing to go to it, if they're willing to discuss what they're grieving over, because it's all about venting. The more you vent, the more I think it assists in you getting over or easing that pain of whatever you're going through. Because God knows, if I'm going through something, I'm called Dion.
Right.
It helps to get it out, and it may not even been a grieving process or grieving anything. It could just be a problem or something heavy on your heart. So I think it would help if somebody is thinking of seeking something like that. I think they really should. It's all about coming to Jesus, being honest with yourself and what you need.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So
Reflecting.
I think a support group is it does not necessarily have to be an organized one. But I think anybody who is dealing with grief should, seek out support, whether it's a formal support group or not. Like I was saying earlier, I wish that they had a support group, or if I would have been able to find one for caregivers a little bit easier at that time for my mom. That would help with the grieving process, of what's going on, what was going on with my mom at that point of time. But if anyone is feeling any sort of grief for any reason, get help. There is nothing wrong with therapy. We as Black people don't like to think about that. We can take care of our own problems. No, go go to therapy. It is okay. And so if you can't find a grief counselor, finding a therapist to at least talk through what your grief is will really, really help a lot. And I can't say that enough. So if your dog died and you're feeling grief and you need to talk to somebody, go ahead and talk to somebody, because that grief is it might be trivial to somebody else, but that grief is real
it's
to
real.
you.
Yeah.
Um, so anybody who is feeling grief should go to a grief support group. And yes, it does help. It allows you to be able to not only get your thoughts out of your mind, it allows people to be able to give you other situations, other comments, that give you love and support at that point in time, that you would not normally have any other way. And it allows you to be around people who understand the situation, who've gone through the situation. And if not your exact one, one similar, or one that they can empathize and sympathize with. So
Yeah.
anybody.
It lets you know you're not by yourself.
Yeah.
You're not the only person that's going through something or anything, because there's some people who think, oh, I'm the only person going through this. No, you're not. Like a young lady, she actually called me when we was doing this. She, unfortunately, she got took advantage of financially. And I told her, I said, honey, you're not the only person going through this. I said, now I'm gonna give you some steps that you can, I'm gonna give you some advice. Only you can choose to do what you want to do at the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? So it is let people know that, like, they're not by themselves. Like, you're not the only person grieving. You're not the only person that's lost something or going through something, or it's just all about, are you willing to step up and be honest with yourself that you're going through something and that you're going to go talk about it to somebody? Because that's one thing. Our people, we be like, oh, we good. No, you're not good. No, you're not. You're not good. You stop lying to yourself. You're not
Right.
good. You know what I'm saying? If you can lie to yourself, that means you're going to allow someone else to lie to you. So be honest with yourself and realize that you are going through something.
And so, and the last thing I want to say is that a lot of people who are depressed are not going through the breathing process. They are stuck in that one moment. And so when we talk about grief, we have to understand that there's a lot of people who think that they are grieving and they're not.
Mm.
There's a lot of people who think that they're grieving and they're not. They're stuck in that moment. They can't even get to the point to grieve because they're stuck in that moment. They're stuck in their head.
Mhm.
They're stuck in their feelings about themselves and not necessarily about the incident, what has happened, and the hurt and the pain of that. It's all about everything around the situation and not of that situation. So when we talk about grief, we have to realize that um, there is a process to it. And you've got to be in that process to actually be able to grieve. You can't be around it. You've got to be in that process.
Wow. You know what,
Facts.
ladies? I think this was amazing. I thank you so much for your transparency. I'm sure our listeners and followers will learn something from the information that we have shared here tonight. Thank you so much. And if you have any parting words, if you want to put your plug in for your entrepreneurial, go right ahead.
Oh, anybody need a health and wellness coach, fitness, workouts, anything, hit me up on my Instagram everyday underscore body won't make itself. I'm an Herbalife distributor. I'm here just to offer good nutrition and good fitness.
All right.
That's what I'm about. And, mental health as well, because we need to also know how to work on ourselves to get to the point where we're ready to be a healthier self. Because some
Yeah.
people don't realize you have to be in the mental space and be ready to do it instead of saying, "Oh, I'm gonna do it," and they're mentally they're not there, they're not ready. So,
All right. Sora Clifton, do you have any parting words? So I
Therapy
want
is
to.
not a bad word.
All right. Therapy is not a bad word. All
let me
right.
spit my juice out, man.
So I do want to say thank you so much for listening. Until next time, be safe, be healthy, and know the difference between depression, grief, and trauma. Good night. Good night, ladies.
Good night.
Good night.